Welcome back. $51 billion. That's what Congress recently approved for Hurricane Sandy relief. And as big as that number is, it still won't cover the estimated $80 billion in damage from the storm. So much was lost: lives, homes, and a sense of security. And with sea levels over the next century predicted to be up to 6 feet higher, even weaker storms will cause devastating flooding. The question is, what can we do to protect ourselves and our cities? Manhattan. This waterfront city is one of the world's great treasures. It's hard to overestimate the importance of this place, especially Lower Manhattan. It's the world's biggest financial center, home to Wall Street, the new One World Trade Center, historic landmarks, to businesses large and small, and thousands of people who call this home. But America's largest city is now at the center of an increasingly urgent debate about how best to prepare for the effects of global warming. We've learned the hard way in the last few months just how vulnerable this island city is.
That is supposed to be a tunnel.
What you're seeing is video shot by a resident of Lower Manhattan in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. One of many New Yorkers who underestimated the power of the sea.
The momentum of the day kind of changed very quickly. It went from excitement and it, kind of snowballed into genuine fear.
Although his building had been under a mandatory evacuation order from New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, Brian Connery decided to ride out the storm with his wife Lindy, thinking it wouldn't be any big deal.
I mean, it definitely looks higher, but you can't see water. Like, starting the promenade, God, someone's running.
They watched it all unfold the afternoon of October 29th from high up on the 23rd floor of their Battery Park apartment. Brian, an amateur videographer, kept his camera rolling.
It wasn't raining very bad. There was this impending storm. There was a lot of news and attention, but it certainly, it was a gloomy day, but it wasn't problematic.
But as night fell, Brian Connery began to change his tune.
We have a lot of water moving down near the tunnel. It's just starting to fill up. But what is most problematic is that is very unsettling. Looks like significant structural damage. Doesn't make me feel real excited to be in a building right above foundational issues.
And then all of a sudden, I'm checking on the window, checking outside occasionally, and then it's like, uh-oh. That's a lot of water coming in. It started flooding into the tunnel almost immediately. You started seeing cars get flooded, and that's when I got goosebumps. That's when it started to get very serious, very fast. And then I started to have second thoughts, and I said, am I supposed to be in this building right now? Maybe Bloomberg was not joking when he said, get out of here.
Power's going out somewhere.
How do you know?
The street lights just kicked out. There it goes.
Brian and Lindy made their way through the lobby of their darkened building. The street out front looked more like a raging river. And those who thought a few sandbags might help were sorely mistaken. These images from New York's Metropolitan Transit Authority, the MTA, show what was happening down in the subways. The worst hit, one of the city's most important subway stations, South Ferry, completely underwater. For 5 days, Lower Manhattan was in the dark. Parts of all 5 boroughs in this city of 8 million were flooded. In New York City alone, more than 40 people were killed. 3 months later, the cleanup continues, even in mighty Lower Manhattan. A relatively untold story of Superstorm Sandy, the damage to Lower Manhattan that persists today. Generators are still needed to power office towers and luxury residential buildings. Some of them were uninhabited for months. And though most subways in the city were back up and running within days, the one here at South Ferry is still closed.
For our system, this was the worst hit when you looked at a station itself.
We got a tour of this restricted area from Vice President of Maintenance Joe Leader.
You realize this line up here was the original water level when the water first came in, so this area was completely flooded.
15 million gallons of corroding seawater flooded this station to a depth of about 50 feet. Until Sandy came to town, 30,000 people a day would travel through here. The MTA spent $530 million to renovate this station in 2009, and it may take as long as 3 years to repair it at a cost of $600 million more. That's because all the electrical circuits and infrastructure needed to run the station were completely destroyed. Now the challenge will be to protect the new equipment when the next storm invariably hits.
Do we take the signaling system? Do we take the components, the signal relay room, and we put that above ground, like some building owners are doing right now, who had generators in the basement? Do you look to put that on a different floor? Those are concepts that you can look at, but everything that you do takes time, takes money.
There is a lingering question hanging over this ruined subway station and all of Lower Manhattan. Was all this damage and the 13-plus foot storm surge that caused it preventable?
Well, following Hurricane Katrina, I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times. It was called A City at Sea, where I predicted that New York City would be flooded. It was not a question of if, but when.
Malcolm Bowman is a professor of physical oceanography at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. He's also coordinator of the Storm Surge Group, which tries to model how storm surges might threaten the New York metropolitan area. For years, Bowman has predicted the city would suffer catastrophic flooding. I want to get back to your prediction. Review for me what your prediction was.
My prediction was, given the low elevation of New York City and the surrounding countryside, that learning about storm surges, looking at the historical record, that with rising sea level and changing climate, that it was inevitable.
And Bowman was eager to share his warnings with anyone who would listen.
We're walking towards a new subway station that's been built called South Ferry.
In this documentary, shot 3 years after his op-ed in the New York Times, Bowman visited the South Ferry subway station while it was still under construction.
I would have thought that in this discussion of climate change that we would have suggested that they build the sides higher.
He knew the entrance was too close to sea level and was bound to flood.
The city likes to keep the subway entrances at street level. So people come off the street, they go straight into the subway, and people don't like having to climb up and then down again to go down a hole in the ground. And so it's a convenience factor, but it would seem to me it would be safer if they built the entrance up 1 or 2 meters, and it would be easy to do, and now's the time to do it.
We brought Bowman back post-Sandy to survey the damage.
I was here in 2008 when this brand new sparkling station, the pride of the city subway system, was being built. And I worried about the elevation here above sea level. It's only about 10 or 11 feet. And I worried at the time, and I spoke to the people about, this is very dangerous, this is too low, it's going to flood one day. And I've been worrying ever since, and it happened. It was obviously inadequate, and it flooded. And it will happen again if they don't do something about it.
Well, there is that old saying that prophets are rarely praised in their time. Has that been your experience?
In their home country, right. I'm beginning to feel my middle name's Noah. And back in 2005, I said, there's a great flood coming. You better start building the ark, but nobody would listen.
Now, Professor Bowman is hoping someone will listen to what he sees as the best long-term solution to protect New York City. It's called a storm surge barrier. What is a storm surge barrier? This animation, produced by the Dutch firm Arcadis, is one design, a sea gate that remains open to shipping and the tides, but can be closed to form a protective wall if a storm surge approaches. This is New York City here.
Right.
The Bronx is up here.
It's the Bronx.
Professor Bowman showed us his vision of what a Seagate system for New York Harbor might look like. So the barriers would be built where?
So one possibility is to put a barrier system where this red line is. It's not a dam, it's more like a bridge, but it has gates that will open to allow shipping through.
Bowman says the Seagate would be just one part of a comprehensive system.
These green lines are augmenting the coastline on both sides with sand dunes, maybe 20, 30 feet high. This would curl around Kennedy Airport, which is there on the eastern side of Jamaica Bay.
But the main barrier here would be at about what height?
Probably 30 feet. This is 5 mile gap across here, but the water is very shallow. It's only 20, 25 feet
So
deep.
this would be, what did you say, 30 feet?
30 feet would give the ultimate protection against a 1,000-year storm. Now, you'd need a second barrier system up on the upper East River here. So this system of two barriers, one here and one here, would protect everything inside, including northern New Jersey, the three major airports, all of this Port Elizabeth, the oil refineries in northern New Jersey, all would be protected.
Now, if this had been in place at the time of Sandy, what would have been the effect?
If a barrier system such as this had been built, properly located, working correctly, there would have been no damage, no flooding damage.
No flooding damage?
No.
So you are convinced it will work?
Oh, it'll work. I mean, this is not rocket science. I mean, this is good civil engineering.
Bowman is confident barriers can work because they do already in other parts of the world. The Netherlands, a country with about 25% of its land below sea level, responded to a deadly flood in the 1950s by building a series of seawalls and barriers that effectively shorten the coastline, making it easier to protect. They have their own Seagate system, like this one near the city of Rotterdam, which opens and closes to let shipping through.
The Thames Barrier and its associated gates are designed to close in the event of a storm surge or river flood.
In England, there's a storm surge barrier on the Thames that has been employed 119 times through the years, protecting London from flooding. And in Russia, this 15-mile-long barrier in St. Petersburg doubles as a highway. It was completed in 2010 at a cost of $6.4 billion.
The barrier has closed 3 times, and it worked so effectively that the people of St. Petersburg didn't even realize they'd been saved from a flood.
Jonathan Goldstick is a vice president with CH2M Hill here in New York. It's a global engineering company on the forefront of water management. His company helped build the 15-mile-long storm surge barrier in St. Petersburg, and he's interested in building a similar 5-mile-long one for New York.
The storm surge barrier concept is very real. I know that when people, including myself, first hear about it, it seems way too big to be possible, and how could it possibly work? But we're not even talking about doing something bigger that's been done elsewhere. We're talking about doing something smaller that's been done elsewhere that has worked very effectively.
Building a barrier system for New York could take anywhere from 4 to 10 years, with cost estimates ranging from $15 to $25 billion. That's a lot of money. But so is the cost of flood-proofing the airports, tunnels, utilities, homes, and buildings along New York Harbor's 500 miles of coastline. Advocates for a storm surge barrier, like Malcolm Bowman, know there needs to be a lot of study before anything could be built.
The next step would be the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers would be asked to do a major study.
As they did in New Orleans after Katrina.
And I believe they will be asked to do this. And some of that money that's just been released, signed into law by President Obama, will be used for that. I'm convinced that will happen. That study may take up to 5 years.
No one is suggesting barriers alone are the answer. And the idea of building barriers is controversial. Critics say they won't protect enough of the coastline, could cause environmental problems, and are way too expensive. Of course, any big project will need cooperation among local, city, and state officials. For now, they are divided on surge barriers. New York's Mayor Michael Bloomberg, for one, is skeptical.
I don't know that I think there's any practical ways to build barriers in the oceans. That's not, when you have an enormous harbor like we do in Long Island Sound, even if you spent a fortune, it's not clear to me that you would get much value for it.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, on the other hand, has called for a comprehensive engineering evaluation of potential barrier systems for New York Harbor. The threat from the sea, that great.
This was Lower Manhattan in 1609. This is Lower Manhattan now. All man-made filled areas. This is Lower Manhattan with the Sandy storm surge. You can see that the man-made areas are the vulnerable areas to the storm surge.
We humans have altered our environment, building great cities by the sea. Now, the sea is advancing. The question, what do we do to protect them?
Well, I think we have to decide as a community that this great city is at risk, and we must protect it at all costs.
Can we afford not to do it?
We cannot afford not to do it, because the danger is there, and with rising sea level, increasing, maybe not frequency, but increasing strength of hurricanes and winter nor'easters, these kind of storms are going to come back to haunt us again and again.
You have no doubt of that.
I have no doubt. I cannot tell you when the next big one will be, but it will come. It's inevitable in the long term. And the sooner we come to that realization, the better, because the longer you put it off, the more damage and destruction and heartache we're going to face.
Professor Malcolm Bowman. When we return, a personal tour of a still devastated Lower Manhattan. You'll see that next. In the shadow of the magnificent Brooklyn Bridge, that great monument to 19th century engineering, an historic New York neighborhood is facing an uncertain future. These cobblestone streets, witnesses to so much history, now find themselves on the front lines of climate change.
It's the oldest neighborhood in New York, or at least the oldest neighborhood in Manhattan. You really feel like you're a part of the original New York City down here.
Marco Passanella has built a life and livelihood just steps away from this scenic vista.
We're standing in front of our store, our building, and it doesn't look like it was hit by Sandy, but everything here was really, well, destroyed. This whole window was pushed in.
His wine shop, Passanella & Son, was one of the first businesses in this historic district to reopen after the storm.
The water came up to this white mark. So this white mark comes from the water. And so it was this height all the way through the store, which means that everything below that line has been rebuilt, really everything below 8 feet.
Passanella was able to save his most expensive wines by bringing them up to his apartment above the store. But most of his inventory was heavily damaged.
This was the store the day after, looking out towards the river. Just a bunch of muck.
He estimates Sandy cost him more than $100,000, a lot of it in lost business, because although his doors are open, most of his neighbors are not.
So this is my next door neighbor, the Paris Cafe, that's been here since the 19th century. A really storied place. Was one of Thomas Edison's favorite hangouts. In some ways, we were lucky compared to the Paris because we don't have a basement. And all of our mechanical systems are upstairs, so we neither had water underneath us nor a boiler to be submerged. These guys have had all of their mechanical systems flooded, and that's why it's taking them so long to get up and running. All of these buildings are empty. All of the stores and all of the apartments above. It's a restaurant Barberini, a restaurant Bin 220, a restaurant Nelson Blue, all closed. It's pretty weird to be 3 blocks from Wall Street, just in the backyard of City Hall, and be so empty. I mean, it's creepy. New York City.
Passanella says it may be late spring or even summer before his neighborhood comes to life again.
It usually just has literally tens of thousands of people are walking up and down this street, going out towards the pier to take a look at the Brooklyn Bridge and maybe to do some shopping. None of those people are here. And a few tourists who haven't gotten the memo.
The story of New York and the sea will always be intertwined. This city made its wealth by trade, its shoreline once crowded with ships from around the globe, as seen in this 1903 film by Thomas Edison, one of the first movies ever taken of New York. But as oceans rise, this place and all coastal communities are going to have to rethink their relationship to the water. That much is certain. The options for what to do about it are not.